As part of our new series, Community Voices, we're looking deeper at how reporting on crime and justice affects our local communities. If you've ever watched a newscast, you may have noticed that crime news is most often reported in the beginning, or A block of a show. But how often is crime news reported compared to other topics of coverage? Extensive research was conducted in that arena in the 80s and 90s, even the 70s, but more recent studies are harder to come by. In fact, one of the most interesting recent studies was conducted by a bunch of high schoolers. James Miller is a media critic and journalism teacher at DuPont Manual High School. In 2012, his students found that crime dominated local TV newscasts in Louisville, Kentucky, making up between 28% and 37% of all news stories. The following year, the numbers went up to between 31% and 52% of all news stories.
Television news, especially, does a lot of crime stories because they're easy to do. I knew there was a lot of crime coverage. I did not anticipate that it would be that much of their coverage.
Crime continues to be a frontrunner of coverage, but in real life, crime is actually down. Using FBI data, the Pew Research Center found that crime rates have fallen for the last 25 years. Violent crime fell 49% between 1993 and 2019. Property crime fell 55% during that time. In 2019, there were a little over 2,100 property crimes per 100,000 people. Violent crimes were at just under 380 per 100,000 people. Clearly, property crime is much more common than violent crime in real life. What about news? Studies have found that violent crime is reported a lot more frequently. One researcher tracked crime stories in Milwaukee for 3 weeks and found that 80% of the crime stories in the Journal Sentinel were violent offenses. On local news website WTMJ.com, violent crime made up 62% of all crime stories. Some researchers have concluded that people who haven't experienced crime firsthand rely on media portrayals to understand it, essentially handing over the keys to construct their crime reality. With violent crime happening to less than 0.5% of the overall population, the idea is its prominence in news drives the public perception of the society more violent than it actually is. People do believe the crime rate is going up, despite the numbers proving otherwise. In more than 80% of Gallup studies conducted since the 90s, more than half of U.S. adults said they believed crime had gone up nationally compared to the previous year. In their most recent study, 78% of Americans believed crime was increasing nationally, the highest percentage since 1993. What about the perspective of community members who do have experience with crime? That's coming up next. This story is part of Community Voices, a new video series designed to cover the full story of crime news and emphasize the narrative of the community when dealing with crime and other community issues.